It was Christmas Eve, 1971. 17-year-old Juliane Koepcke sat quietly next to her mother, Maria, as they waited at Lima Airport in Peru. Their flight to Pucallpa, deep in the Amazon jungle, was delayed for hours, and tension filled the air. Passengers paced the floor, tired and frustrated. When the flight was finally called, it was long after sunset. Juliane's father, a scientist who studied wildlife, had warned them not to take this particular airline, LANSA. The airline had a bad reputation, and its planes were known for being poorly maintained. The aircraft they boarded that night was a Lockheed Electra, a plane with a tragic history of crashes. But despite her father's concerns, Juliane and her mother didn't want to miss Christmas with him, so they boarded anyway. Shortly after takeoff, things began to feel uneasy. As the plane climbed into the night sky, dark storm clouds gathered. Lightning flashed outside the small windows, illuminating the worried faces inside. 45 minutes into the flight, the turbulence grew worse. The plane shook violently, trays rattled, and some passengers cried out in fear. Then it happened. A blinding flash of lightning struck the plane directly. The loud crack was followed by a terrifying shudder as the aircraft lurched and began to nosedive. People screamed in panic. Oxygen masks dropped, and in those final moments before disaster, Juliane's mother whispered softly to her, "This is the end. It's all over." But for Juliane, it was not the end. Suddenly, the plane broke apart in midair. Metal tore, luggage scattered, and Juliane, still strapped to her seat, felt herself sucked out into the night sky. One moment she had been sitting next to her mother. The next she was falling alone, surrounded by darkness and storm. Juliane later described that terrifying moment as surreal. The wind roared in her ears. The green canopy of the Amazon rushed toward her, and she felt like the plane had abandoned her, leaving her behind. She was falling 10,000 feet to what should have been certain death. Experts still debate how she survived that fall. Some believe that the row of seats she was strapped into may have slowed her descent, acting almost like a parachute. Others think the thick trees and vines of the rainforest cushioned her impact, just enough. Whatever the explanation, it was nothing short of a miracle. A teenage girl had fallen from the sky and lived. But when Juliane awoke, hurt and alone on the jungle floor, her nightmare was far from over. The crash was only the beginning of a fight for survival that would test every ounce of her courage, knowledge, and determination. When Juliane Koepcke opened her eyes, she was lying flat on the damp jungle floor. The thick canopy above blocked most of the sunlight, casting shadows all around her. She was still strapped into her airplane seat, but everything else was gone. The wreckage, the other passengers, and her mother, all missing. At first, Juliane could hardly move. Pain shot through her body. Her collarbone was broken, one eye was swollen shut, and she had deep cuts and bruises all over. She was wearing only a thin summer dress and had lost one of her sandals. But despite her injuries and the shock, something familiar surrounded her. The sounds of the jungle. Birds called out from high branches, insects buzzed nearby, and frogs croaked from hidden places. Juliane recognized them all. Before this flight, she had grown up in the Amazon with her zoologist parents. She knew this forest better than most. It was almost like a second home. But this time, the jungle felt different, dangerous, unforgiving, and filled with the unknown. As Juliane sat up, a terrifying thought came to her. No one knew where she was. Even though search planes might be flying overhead, the thick cover of the rainforest made it almost impossible for rescuers to see her. If she stayed where she was, she would die. Then she remembered her father's advice from her childhood. In the Amazon, water is life. If you are lost, find a stream and follow it downstream. Rivers lead to people. With great effort, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. Her head spun, and every step hurt, but she forced herself forward. Nearby, she found a small stream winding through the dense vegetation. The water was cool and clear, and she drank deeply before beginning to follow its path. The rainforest was beautiful but harsh. Vines tangled her legs, thorny plants scratched her skin, and the heat was unbearable during the day, while the nights turned freezing cold. Without her glasses, which she had lost in the crash, everything beyond a few feet was blurry. Snakes, insects, and hidden dangers were everywhere. But Juliane kept moving, step by painful step. Food was another problem. She found almost nothing to eat, just a small bag of candy from the crash site. She rationed it carefully, eating only a tiny piece each day to keep up her strength. She had no shelter, no shoes, and no protection. Yet she pressed on, driven by the hope that someone, somewhere, would find her. After the crash, Juliane's body was weak, but her mind stayed sharp. Her jungle knowledge helped her avoid poisonous plants and dangerous animals. Each day was a challenge, but she remembered what her father taught her. Trust the water, keep moving, and never give up. But Juliane didn't know that this was only the beginning of her long journey. Worse horrors lay ahead, and the jungle was not finished testing her yet. Juliane moved slowly and carefully through the thick Amazon rainforest, following the stream like her father had taught her. The jungle was both familiar and terrifying. Each day, she stumbled over roots and slipped on wet leaves. At night, she curled up on the cold, damp ground, listening to the eerie sounds of animals around her. Her body was weakening. She was hungry. Her broken collarbone ached constantly, and the scratches on her arms and legs were becoming infected. The little bag of candy she had salvaged from the crash was almost gone. Still, she pushed forward, convinced that if she kept following the stream, she would eventually find help. Then one day, she rounded a bend in the stream and froze in horror. Just ahead of her were 3 bodies from the plane crash. They had fallen headfirst into the soft jungle mud, their legs sticking up at an unnatural angle, like strange, grim markers. Juliane had never seen a dead body before. The sight shocked her to her core, and she hesitated, terrified of what she might find. She was haunted by one terrible thought. Could one of these bodies be her mother? Heart pounding, Juliane slowly approached. She bent down and gently poked one of the legs with a stick. As she got closer, she saw a small detail that brought her both relief and sorrow. The woman was wearing nail polish, but it wasn't the color her mother used. Her mother wasn't here, but this gruesome discovery was a harsh reminder of the reality she faced. Others had survived the crash, but hadn't made it far. Juliane realized that she might have been the only one still alive. As she continued downstream, the rainforest tested her at every step. Sharp vines tore at her skin, and insects swarmed around her, biting relentlessly. Without her glasses, she could barely see where she was going. And at night, the temperature dropped, leaving her shivering and wet from rain. But Juliane refused to stop. She remembered her parents' lessons about the Amazon's dangers. She avoided brightly colored frogs that could be poisonous and steered clear of snakes when she could see them. Even though she was frightened, she used her jungle knowledge to survive. Day after day, she staggered forward, clinging to the hope that she would eventually find help. She knew that this endless rainforest could swallow a person whole. Each hour that passed made her feel smaller and more alone. Her injuries grew worse, her hunger deeper, and her fear greater. Yet, despite it all, Juliane kept going, one painful step at a time. But she didn't know that her greatest trial was yet to come. The jungle would soon test her endurance in a way she could never have imagined. By now, Juliane Koepcke had been alone in the jungle for several days. Her small bag of candy was empty. She was starving, exhausted, and her injuries were worsening. Her right shoulder, where she had a deep cut, had become swollen and painful. Without proper care, it was clear the wound was infected. As she walked slowly along the stream, Juliane noticed something strange about the wound. When she looked closer, horror washed over her. Tiny white maggots were crawling inside the gash on her arm. The infection was so bad that flies had laid eggs there, and now the maggots were eating her flesh. Even in this terrifying moment, Juliane's survival training from her childhood came back to her. She remembered how her father had once treated their dog's infected wound by pouring kerosene on it to kill the maggots. But out here in the jungle, she had nothing. No kerosene, no medicines, no tools. All she could do was continue walking and hope to find help soon. Her body felt weaker every day. Her feet were blistered and cut from walking barefoot. Her one remaining sandal was barely holding together. The nights felt colder, and her hunger left her dizzy. Insects bit her constantly, leaving itchy, painful welts all over her skin. The jungle was closing in, and Juliane was losing strength. Then, on the 9th day, she saw something that made her heart race. A small hut made of palm leaves, standing near the riverbank. It was old and weathered, probably used by local hunters or loggers. Near the hut, there was a rusty fuel can, and when Juliane picked it up and opened it, she immediately recognized the smell: gasoline. She knew what she had to do. Trembling with exhaustion and fear, she poured the gasoline directly into the infected wound on her shoulder. The pain was almost unbearable. The maggots began burrowing deeper, trying to escape the burning liquid, but Juliane gritted her teeth and plucked them out, one by one, until she removed more than 30 maggots from the wound. When she finished, she was nearly faint from the pain and exhaustion. She crawled under the roof of the hut and collapsed on the dirt floor. For a while, she wasn't sure she would wake up again. She felt like her body couldn't take any more, but she had done what she could to stop the infection. As she lay there, half conscious and too weak to move, she listened to the sounds of the jungle one more time. The birds, insects, and frogs she had once loved now felt distant. She didn't know if she had the strength to go on. All she could do was hope. But something unexpected was about to happen, something that would finally bring her ordeal to an end. Juliane Koepcke lay motionless on the floor of the small hut. Her body was so weak that she could barely lift her head. 9 days of fighting to survive in the jungle had drained every bit of her energy. Her shoulder throbbed from the gasoline she had poured into the infected wound, but she felt a strange sense of calm. She had found shelter, but her strength was nearly gone. Then, in the stillness of the afternoon, she heard something that made her eyes open wide: voices. Human voices. At first, she thought she was imagining it, her mind playing tricks on her after days of isolation. But the voices grew louder. They were speaking Spanish. Slowly, carefully, Juliane sat up and peered out from the hut. 3 Peruvian men were standing near the river, staring at the hut with curious looks. They were loggers from a nearby camp, and they had come to check on this small shelter. When they stepped inside, they froze at the sight before them: a filthy, pale, barefoot girl lying on the floor, looking more like a ghost than a living person. For a brief moment, they hesitated. In Amazonian folklore, there are stories of spirits, water spirits who appear in human form as omens of danger. The loggers thought Juliane might be one of these spirits. But Juliane found the strength to speak. In a faint voice, she whispered in Spanish, "I'm a girl who fell from the sky." The men were shocked. They immediately understood that she was real, and that she needed help badly. They gently lifted her up and offered her food and water. She could barely eat, but the simple kindness of these strangers gave her hope for the first time since the crash. The loggers decided to take her with them. They placed her carefully in their canoe and paddled downriver for hours, heading toward a small village. Along the way, they cared for her as best they could. Though she was weak and fading in and out of consciousness, Juliane felt a deep sense of relief. After 9 long, terrifying days alone in the jungle, she was finally safe. When they reached the village, word spread quickly about the miraculous survivor. A local nurse tended to Juliane's wounds and gave her something to eat. The next day, a rescue plane arrived to take her to a hospital. When Juliane arrived at the hospital in Pucallpa, she was pale, thin, and covered in insect bites, scratches, and bruises. But she was alive, against all odds. And waiting at the hospital was her father. After 10 agonizing days of searching and hoping, he had feared the worst. Their reunion was emotional, filled with tears and relief. Juliane's fight for survival was finally over, but soon, she would learn heartbreaking truths about the crash that would haunt her for years to come. Juliane Koepcke lay in her hospital bed, recovering from her injuries. The doctors treated her broken collarbone, her deep cuts, and the infection in her shoulder. Her body was exhausted, but she was alive, something that seemed almost impossible after falling 10,000 feet and surviving 9 days alone in the Amazon rainforest. Her father stayed by her side, overwhelmed with relief. He had searched desperately, not knowing whether his daughter was alive or dead. Now, he was grateful beyond words to have her back. But as Juliane regained her strength, grim news began to surface. Authorities investigating the crash of LANSA Flight 508 reported that she had not been the only one who survived the initial impact. When rescue teams finally reached the wreckage, they discovered that as many as 14 other passengers had also survived the crash. Among them was Juliane's own mother. However, unlike Juliane, the others had been trapped in the dense jungle, injured and unable to move. The thick canopy had hidden them from rescue planes, and they had no experience surviving in such an environment. Over the following days, one by one, they all died, alone and waiting for help that never came. Juliane was devastated by the news that her mother had lived through the crash, but had died soon after. She couldn't stop thinking about it. She wondered if, somewhere nearby, her mother had been lying hurt, hoping for rescue, just as she had been. That thought would haunt Juliane for years to come. Then another heartbreaking truth came to light. LANSA, the airline they had flown with, had a long record of problems. Their planes were poorly maintained, and their safety standards were weak. The Lockheed Electra that crashed had already been known for its accidents. And on that stormy Christmas Eve, LANSA had taken a terrible risk by flying directly into dangerous weather conditions. The Peruvian government moved quickly after the crash. Just 2 weeks later, LANSA's license was revoked, and the airline shut down for good. But this action came too late for Juliane, her mother, and the many others who lost their lives on Flight 508. Remarkably, even after all she had endured, Juliane did something extraordinary. Instead of avoiding the jungle forever, she returned. She went back to the crash site to help recovery teams locate wreckage and bodies so that families could have closure. Walking again through the dense jungle where she had fought to survive, Juliane faced her trauma head-on. Juliane's survival story quickly spread around the world. Newspapers called her the girl who fell from the sky, and people were amazed at her courage. But Juliane didn't seek fame. The experience had changed her deeply, and though her body healed, her heart still carried the pain of loss. Her journey wasn't over. In the years ahead, the jungle, the place that had nearly killed her, would call her back in an entirely new way. After her recovery, Juliane Koepcke could have left the rainforest behind forever. Many people would have chosen never to return to the place where they nearly died. But Juliane was different. The Amazon had nearly killed her, but it had also saved her, and it had been her childhood home. Years later, in the early 1980s, Juliane returned to the very jungle where she had crashed, this time not as a lost survivor, but as a scientist. Like her parents, she chose to study zoology. Her focus was on bats, animals that many people misunderstood, but that played an essential role in the rainforest ecosystem. For her doctoral research, Juliane lived deep in the jungle at Panguana, the small research station her parents had founded years before. She stayed for 18 months, studying bats up close. She observed how they lived, what they ate, how they behaved, and what roles they played in the environment. Life at Panguana was simple but demanding. Juliane slept in a hammock, cooked over a fire, and walked through the dense jungle every day, much like she had done during her 9 days of survival, but this time on her own terms. Without modern comforts, she was fully immersed in the wilderness that had once tested her limits. Her research was groundbreaking for its time. Over those 18 months, Juliane identified and documented 52 different species of bats in the area. Her careful work helped scientists better understand the biodiversity of the Amazon rainforest, and her findings were used to promote conservation efforts. But Juliane's work didn't stop with her research. After earning her doctorate, she took over the management of the Panguana Research Station. Under her leadership, the small station grew in importance and influence. She expanded the protected area from 460 acres to more than 1,700 acres, preserving habitats for countless plants and animals. Juliane worked closely with local indigenous communities, including the Ashaninka people, respecting their deep knowledge of the land. She also became an outspoken advocate for protecting the Amazon rainforest from threats like illegal logging, mining, and pollution. Through her dedication, Panguana became more than just a field station. It became a symbol of conservation and a safe haven for wildlife and scientific research. Researchers from all over the world traveled there to study the rich ecosystems that Juliane helped protect. Her work earned her many honors. In 2019, the government of Peru awarded her the Order of Merit as a Grand Officer, one of the country's highest civilian honors. 2 years later, Germany honored her with the Federal Cross of Merit for her contributions to science and international cooperation. But for Juliane, these awards were not the goal. Her mission had become clear: to defend the rainforest that had once both threatened and saved her life, because now, that forest needed saving more than ever. Even after decades of research and conservation work, Juliane Koepcke never forgot how fragile the rainforest could be. She had survived its dangers as a teenager, but as an adult, she saw new threats rising. Threats not from nature, but from people. Illegal logging was cutting deep into the Amazon, destroying ancient trees that had stood for centuries. Illegal gold mining was even worse. It poisoned rivers with toxic mercury, killing fish and harming the indigenous communities who depended on those waters for food and life. Climate change added more problems. The weather was shifting, rains became unpredictable, streams dried up, and animals struggled to adapt. For Juliane, these changes were heartbreaking. The same jungle that had saved her when she fell from the sky was now under attack, and it needed protection. She used her position at Panguana to speak out. She gave interviews, wrote articles, and worked with governments and environmental organizations. Her message was always clear. The Amazon was essential not just for Peru, but for the whole world. It held more species of plants and animals than almost anywhere else on Earth. Its trees helped absorb carbon and slow climate change. If it was destroyed, everyone would suffer. Juliane also worked closely with local communities. She believed that protecting the rainforest wasn't just about fences and laws. It was about partnerships. She respected the knowledge of the Ashaninka and other indigenous peoples who had lived in the Amazon for generations. Together, they worked on projects that helped protect the forest while also supporting the people who called it home. Her efforts made a real difference. The protected area around Panguana continued to grow, and more species found sanctuary there. Scientists came from around the world to study its biodiversity, using what they learned to help protect other forests. In 1998, decades after her near-death experience, Juliane returned to the crash site one last time, this time accompanied by filmmaker Werner Herzog, who was making a documentary called Wings of Hope. Herzog himself had narrowly missed being on LANSA Flight 508, so their journey was deeply personal for both of them. As they walked through the jungle, they found pieces of the plane still scattered among the trees, bits of metal, parts of seats, quiet reminders of that terrible day in 1971. For Juliane, it was emotional but also healing. She could see how far she had come, not just surviving the fall and her 9 days in the jungle, but turning her experience into a life of purpose. Even now, Juliane remains active in conservation. She warns that the rainforest's future is uncertain and that global action is needed to save it. For her, this mission is personal. The forest that had once seemed ready to kill her had, in the end, allowed her to live, and she has spent her life repaying that gift. Her story continues to inspire people around the world, not just as a tale of survival, but as a reminder of resilience, courage, and the need to protect the natural world that sustains us all.